So who are you and what do you do?
Hey, I'm Nick Mattei. I'm an associate now, professor of computer science. I just got promoted on January 1st. So I'm associate professor of computer science at Tulane University, where I do a lot of teaching and research around artificial intelligence, machine learning, all the fun stuff of like making computers uh, act smarter. I think is the way that I like to pitch it to people. And then I do a lot of work also across the university with various stakeholders in the law school and sociology about the impacts of technology, specifically AI, on society. And that's a lot of the work that we do at our Tulane Center of Excellence for Community Engaged AI, which is a big program that we're running right now.
What I'd like to do is something I don't typically do, which is take a bit of a step back and give you some space to talk about your path with artificial intelligence in particular. I'd love to hear about when you were first introduced to it, what you've done with it, and where you're at. The context of it being primarily that I have been wanting very much to have a conversation with a real expert in it and clearly you meet that part and probably surpass it. But from not the business perspective of AI, which I tend to bring to it, but an actual technologist person who's into it. So again, I want to give you some space to just walk us through a bit of your AI journey.
Yeah. So I've always been really into computers and science. My mom was a program coordinator at a science center. My dad's a professor, so I kind of was bred to do this sort of thing. But I've always
You're
been
in the
really
family
interested.
business, Nick.
And so I've always been really into sort of technology and applications of technology. I think I started getting into it when I was in middle school, programming in BASIC. Like it was really neat to be able to uh, see what it's like to give the computer instruction and then have it, you know, to do things. And so I was programming these like story games in BASIC that I thought were really neat, right? And you have like if statements that they can do two different things. And I'm like, oh, this is really cool. Like what, how do you make the computer or make technology do kind of smart and interesting things. And this was around the time that IBM did the Deep Blue project, and they beat Gary Kasparov in chess, and things like that. And so I was always really interested in computers. I mean, I took computer classes for a long time. I did a computer magnet thing in high school. I did computer science in college. I actually left. I started graduate school for AI for about a year, and then I took a job working at NASA building small sats, which were these autonomous flying satellites, and I was doing a lot of software and hardware for those for a couple of years, and that was a lot of fun. But I wanted to sort of do more. I think do more like in depth, and it was really fun to be building projects. But so then I went back to graduate school to focus on AI. I got a lot more into decision making and machine learning, and how do we use data, both to build things but also really advance our understanding of how you make these things work. How do you learn from data? How do you mimic what we call intelligence in quotes that nobody can see me, but I'm quoting here, which is really I think what AI is all about. At the end of the day, is how do you make this computer do things that appear intelligent? And then so I went to graduate school. I finished my PhD, really focusing again on this, on data and what we call collective decision making. So how do you sort of infer what people want, when you're scrolling through your apps from behavior and data. And then I actually took a job in Australia for a number of years, and I was working at a government public-private partnership there. We were doing consulting around technology-based things. We were helping route trucks and schedule all sorts of things and do all these really interesting optimizations where the computer, this is AI the way I see it. When you click on Google Maps and you say, okay, well, get me to my destination in the most efficient way possible, it's using more computation than it took us to go to the moon the first time. And it's doing that for you to get to the grocery store. And it's predicting traffic from real time. It's integrating all of these things. And it's this very smart thing that computers doing that now is just, a thing your phone does. We don't even consider it AI sometimes. So I was in Australia, I did that for quite a while. And then I was offered a position at IBM's TJ Watson Research Center in New York. The guy that interviewed me was the guy that ran the Deep Blue project. So it was really neat for me to be able to work on the same hall as Murray Campbell and some of these other folks that really, did a lot of this early AI work, especially a lot of this early game playing work. And so I was at IBM for a couple of years, worked on a lot on, integrating data across products, integrating data with intent, right? So we were doing a lot of the stuff that like ChatGPT is doing, but like, right before the Transformer papers started coming out. So we were kind of trying to do it with these things called knowledge graphs. And it was a lot of fun. That's all sort of really changed a lot in the last, even 5 or 6 years. And then, one of the things I missed when I was in industry was I do really love teaching. I love working with students, and trying to work with them and lead them on that path of discovery. I think one of the most rewarding things for me, and one of the reasons why I like talking about AI a lot, is, really talking to people and helping them understand these. And so I came to Tulane in 2018, and I've been here ever since, and really focused on doing research. And Tulane has a lot of support and great commitment for interdisciplinary work, which is really what's grown into our work around technology and the impact on society, working with community partners, working with data partners in the city, working with data partners in the state, and trying to understand how we can use these tools to in the communities where people need access to these tools, but they may not have the expertise, they may not know what they really can do. And so that's really the goal of some of the work that we do now is how do we, how do we go in there and make sure that this stuff is working for people and building things that they need.
So let's act as if I know nothing about this space, because I think when I have conversations with people, there's a lot of hyperbole. And my running joke is everything has AI now. I call it the Lion King moment. Everything the light touches is AI now in technology. You can't see an app or anything that doesn't say AI powered or AI first or AI enabled. Help me understand the delineation between coding and what you would define as AI. Or said another way, there was an article I read that really made me laugh. The title was something like, is it AI or just computers doing what computers do?
It's a really good question. And I think even within, as someone who's been working and publishing in the AI space for almost 10 years now, gosh, I'm getting old. It's even kind of, there's a lot of contention over what it is even here. And so there's some folks that will say, logic, something that we would do like logic programming or the routing type stuff, the stuff that Google does, in the navigation, that's not really AI now. Which is funny because like the first paper about Google search was actually published at an AI conference. So at some point, Google search was AI, right? And now AI is just whatever this new, it's generative. It's really just around this generative AI stuff. And there's kind of this folk joke thing in the field of AI. It's called Tesla's theorem. It's that, AI is whatever computers haven't done yet. Right.
Okay.
And so that's kind of what ends up happening in a lot of ways. Because if you think about what you're doing with programming, a lot of the stuff that's happening now with data, like at the end of the day, your Netflix recommendations, your product recommendations, a lot of that stuff is really coming from data. It's really the big data revolution. We're just now kind of calling it AI. You can swap AI in for big data from 10 years ago, and it would be, kind of the same thing. But I've always been kind of a big tent guy around AI. I think the sort of animating idea articulated sort of in the original 1950s AI papers from Turing and McCarthy are, simulating human intelligence or making computers appear to do things that intelligent things do. And what are intelligent things? Well, they're people. And so if we can make the computer do things that sort of trick you or actually do things that are smart, then that's anything in service of that is kind of AI. And that's a definition that I use. And I realize I just defined like all of computing under that umbrella. But I think even within then, it's really, I think, about a goal, right? Are you trying to do something really smart with that? Are you trying to, when you have a personalized shopper, you have product recommendation, you have Netflix popping up and saying, hey, you might like this, right? You're trying to stimulate what a good friend would do, what a personal shopper would do. What if you had a navigator, like, and they have a, Formula One or whatever that tells you where to make all your turns, what that person would do, right? So I think if your goal is to have the computer do these intelligent things, then you're engaging in AI research in a way. I think more.
I was going to say, so let me maybe tighten it up from how I see it as a delineation, and I'm happy to go back and forth and you to tell me, Mitch, you're fundamentally wrong, which is fine too. Because I think what I'm hearing you say is more of a zeros and one and input output, what I would call traditional coding. We give it a problem and we are either feeding it the solution or areas of which of a database for it to look and to pull something out. When I think of AI, I think of it as an algorithm code set of rules that is set as a baseline by which you could ask this system to do something and it can return it back to you without having the human having told it what to do. And I would argue that the next level of that would be to explain to you why it did it. That to me
Oh, there we
sounds
go.
more like artificial intelligence versus it's just stuff computers haven't done. Because I could make the argument that we're using new tool sets that are obviously making it less human intervention, but that may not necessarily be an artificial intelligence, that it's not actually thinking on its own and able to explain its rationale. To me, that would be the barrier of intelligence I would look at.
Okay. I like that. I like that. I think this is it's kind of fun here, right? Because the definition can change, and I think there it's very much
Yeah.
open to
And I'm
interpretation.
not saying mine's the dictionary definition, but when we have these these conversations about even Web3, and we would talk about things like NFTs, and then NFTs. Oh no, well Web3 is also crypto, and then you're like, oh no, but no, oh, it's a metaverse. Oh, no, no, Web3 is now also the metaverse, and it gets into this opaque place where you're just saying computers or technology.
Right.
And I feel like when we're looking at this, we might have to take a different perspective because of the fact that it may be creating and rationalizing it without really the human telling it to.
Yeah. So I think what you're kind of getting to is sort of what one is sort of formally defined as machine learning, right? And so machine learning or inductive learning, right, is this idea that you're not going to explicitly program the computer, right? It's going to take information from data and it's going to understand it, process it in some way, and it's going to learn, again, I'm making quotes, for itself. And fun history fact here, this was sort of first articulated by this guy named Arthur Samuel, who was trying to get computers to teach themselves to play checkers. He was also coincidentally at IBM, which is another recent one. I was really excited to get. Um, and so this is a lot of what we're doing now, right? That we're doing this in what's called inductive learning from data or machine learning. So the way that this works is you show the computer a bunch of examples, and then it will generalize those examples to a new piece of data, right? And this is one of these things that it sounds scary until you realize that we've all done this, right? We all did this in high school, if you went to high school in the US, which is where you drew a two-dimensional plot, which was like, okay, you ask everybody what their shoe size was, and you ask them what their height was. And if you're trying to predict their height from their shoe size, you ask, say, 7 or 8 people, you get these different shoe sizes, you plot all those on a little graph, and you draw the line of best fit through them, right? And you can use that line. So let's say you never had anybody with a size 12 shoe, but you could use that line, that y equals mx plus b line, and you can use that to predict size 12. That's exactly what machine learning is doing, right? It's taking a bunch of data points and then it's interpolating between them. Now, when we do this, let's say with a large language model or something like that, instead of having 2 dimensions like what I just described, you have 500 billion dimensions,
Right.
right? And instead of just shoe size, you have every word on the internet. And this is where things get crazy, right? And they get crazy in terms of scale. And it's the amount of data we have now. One of the things I like to say is that like the big data sort of revolution, sort of the datafication of everything is what's enabling a lot of these AI algorithms to work. A lot of these algorithms are from the 60s and the 70s. What's different is that we have computing at a scale that we've never seen before. We have data at a scale we've never seen before. And these algorithms that can take that data and crunch it and find these best fits, right? Find these hyperplanes, these lines, whatever they are, and whatever dimensions you're in, to do these predictions. That's what's really changed. And that I think is what folks are afraid of, is because they see what's happening is that, like you were saying, in terms of artificial intelligence, we're just taking all this data and we're just crunching it through these algorithms, and then we're using it to prediction you think. And sometimes it works really well, and sometimes it works really badly. And I think this is where people get a little scared about, like you were talking about with not being explicitly programmed.
But if we go down that road, we could say things like the calculator made us rethink math. It didn't stop us from having mathematicians. It just made us rethink how we are teaching and to think about it. computer did that in a myriad of ways. Social media and publishing changed the way in which we think about how communications work. But if we follow that train of thought, coupled with what you just said, the challenge to me is that, well, then we are already at the point of concern, which is ultimately it's already then way smarter than us. It can't not be because it has so much more information that it's able to extrapolate and create something based on whether it's good or bad than any human would be capable of. That to me is quite a statement.
I mean, I think it is a statement. I think the way that I might phrase it slightly differently, but I'm generally on board with it. These machines are fast and they can look at more data than you or I are possibly ever going to look at in our entire lives. And so they are smarter than us in certain ways, just like your calculator is smarter than you in a certain way, right? I can't take the natural log of some gigantic number in my head. I mean, we used to employ teams of people to do that and write all these giant tables down. And now we have this thing that we carry around in our pocket that does it for us automatically, you know?
But these
And
results are different, aren't they, Nick? I mean, if we're going to be honest, it's not saying, help me remember what year Motley Crue released Shout at the Devil and how do you spell the guitar player's name? We're saying it to things like, I need to create a report that has to be 500 words based off of these inputs. And it's able to consistently deliver
yeah,
that work. So when we're moving from what I would say an automation tool to a creation tool or a higher editing tool, which is what we have currently,
yeah.
that to me creates a challenge.
No, it does. It does. And I think that's why this is everywhere that you sort of see now is because everyone's kind of trying to figure out how, what do we do with this? How do we deploy this responsibly? And how does this fit into our current processes? Because especially the language and the image generation stuff is it really is wildly different in how fast it's moving, even to me, who's been hanging around for a long time. It's this the speed and the scale of the change over the last couple of years has been, amazing. I joked when I was still at IBM that because when the Transformers paper came out, which is the T in ChatGPT, which this about 7 or 8 years ago, I was like, this is crazy, like how much this is changing. And every year I'm like, it can't possibly go faster. And every year it seems to go faster. And I think that's where a lot of these concerns come from too. Cause like you said, it is different in a lot of ways. And that it's very good, especially, the text generation stuff is very good at, I would argue, fairly basic kind of writing tasks.
Sure.
Like, grammar, it does the grammar checking. It does things like that. My friend was really obsessed with it for a while because it's very good at writing like wedding vows and self-help articles. Because you have to remember these things are trained on, the internet, which is full of a lot of, I would say, okay writing. But you're not going to get something really super creatively new, right? You're not going to get Faulkner out of it. You're not going to get, someone who's using language in a different way, or something like that. Because at the end of the day, these are, going back to what we talked about, they are kind of pattern recognition machine, right? And they are really integrating the data they have, maybe in new and unique ways. And maybe that's how we work, right? But I think it can't, see is not the right word. It can't sort of get to places it hasn't been before. And I still like to think that as people, we can get to places we haven't been before, or we can go and we can actively experience new things, right? And I think at the end of the day, these are big programs that are trained on a lot of data, but data that we're choosing to give to them. And there's a lot of responsibility with that. Dive into that if you want, but I think that's where some of the danger comes from as well. What data we're giving these things.
I want to get to that, but I want to stay a bit on this thread a little bit because I think of people like Douglas Rushkoff who would look at these tools and say, they're not even as smart as Wikipedia on a bad day, that it's just a very alluring web interface backing what is traditionally historical information. So it's not able to necessarily look forward and create that as a creative source would do. And then on the other side, I look at my personal usage of it and how I trained certain models in ChatGPT to understand my 20,000 plus articles and how I write and how I think, and its ability to create, I would say things like titles or to iterate on a concept I'm doing, it often blows me back in my seat. where I can't believe that I would look at the output and think, I don't know if I'd come up with that, or if I did, it would take way more. So yeah, I vacillate between those two spaces. One of them makes me go, we're safe because Douglas Rushkoff is smart and knows his stuff. The other part of me goes, but it's already doing headlines better than I am. It's already helping me restructure what I've written in a better way than I can because it's understanding things like search engine optimization standards and other things that I'm not paying attention to as a creative person. When I look at it, the output, I'm not saying it's less creative or more basic. I'm actually thinking this is quite the improvement, that it is really moving me along in a way that spell check and Grammarly certainly hasn't.
Yeah, and I think that's where the opportunity exists with a lot of these tools. Is like I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it's thinking about SEO. It's thinking about a lot of these, a lot of these side constraints. It's considering more things at once than you can, and then that you are. And I think that's one of the things that the computer's always been very good at, right? It's always been much better at dividing its time between lots of little mundane tasks than we have. And that, I think, is where the power lies, the usefulness lies. I think some of the danger, right? Because sometimes, you hire other people to pay attention to those things.
Correct.
But now, one person can have this, I don't want to say assistant, it has this a tool that is able to help you, pay attention to all of those things at once so that you can focus on maybe I would be lying if I had, I use it to help me come up with like, it's great for acronyms in academia. We use
So good for
acronyms for
acronyms.
things. Oh my gosh,
Great.
it's great. Um, but to bounce those around, right? And like maybe rework them and things like that. So it really is, I think, really powerful for that. But at the end of the day, I don't know. I don't use the word hallucinate. I don't use the word understand because it doesn't, right? It's looking for patterns in large amounts of data. And what's it being trained on? I mean, think back to what it's being trained on, right, Mitch? It's being trained on all of the good articles that you've put out.
Right.
So of course the new ones look like the other good ones that you've done. You didn't feed it all the bad examples, all the ones that aren't very good, that never made it to the website. So it's really, really keyed in on these positive examples. And I think that's where it can help, pull out patterns that are useful to you. And we've seen this before, right? We saw this in the early days of Netflix when we didn't have the language model. We just had what people were watching. And then you can start to see patterns in that because, and this is again, the power of these machines and the power of the AI and the machine learning stuff is it can really look at more data simultaneously than you or I will ever be able to do. And I mean, that's just a fundamental human limitation. Say we have two eyes, so that's it.
So I'm willing to accept this idea that it's anything that computers haven't done yet. I'm okay with it. And I'm not going to be a stickler for my definition over this because I am a tech optimist by nature and I love all this stuff and I'm deeply ingrained in it. I've even gone so far as to create a delineation between my definition of artificial intelligence and generative AI. And my generative AI perspective is similar. It's code algorithm that is looking at multiple databases and creating a unique answer result based on what those inputs are. Because I do think that if we're going to prescribe to the idea that it's doing it on its own as an AI thing and to be able to explain its rationale, to me, that's not necessarily what I'm seeing in generative AI. What I'm seeing in generative AI, its ability to take multiple sources and create something unique out of it. Right. Now, I do this not to put one in a box versus the other. I do this because I'm typically speaking to business leaders. And I don't want them to be fooled into this idea that they bought a package of software and suddenly it's learning on its own and able to tell, we hired 50 humans that are now this AI software, but rather understand really what these tools as the output might be.
Yep.
Do you think that part of the challenge of generative AI is that it's actually taking away from the greater perspective of what AI can do, that we look at it and go, oh, like this is the tool that now replaces the spell checker, that this is the tool that now creates things. But ultimately, like what you're saying is AI will be B2C, it'll be B2B, it'll be a part of every node of every 0 and 1. It will have its own AI in it. How overwhelming can we be when we think about that? And do you prescribe to this idea that maybe we need to maybe put generative AI in its own category and not lump it into all AI?
I mean, I personally wish we would. I really enjoy the fact that you've nuanced it that way, because I think you're totally right in that a lot of what, if you want sort of more traditional AI where you can integrate across databases, like you said, that's something like Google search, right? Think about what it's doing. It's
Right.
integrating, it's integrating across hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of websites, right? It's going in there and it's able to say, okay, I found these words that are related to your search in this point over here on this database.
But
And again, going
but it's curating, not creating, right? Like
right,
that's
it's
the difference
curating but
of the
not creating.
output,
It's
right?
searching
That
in some way.
But that would be the difference between, it's actually a really good example. Let's talk about that, right? The idea of like what Google does as the output is essentially showing the results that another human created or coded to the website. But when you ask that same question to ChatGPT, it's going through all of those sources, essentially, maybe not all of those, and creating its own output for it in a different voice. Would that be an easier way to look at it?
I think it's a better way to look at it. And I think and this is why I think we need to make this distinction between something like Google search, which again was published as an AI conference. When Google first came out, it drove all these other companies out of business because
Yeah.
what it was doing at the time was magic. It was finding very, very relevant documents on very, very small scraps of words, right? And so it is, a really powerful tool. But like you said, it's just able to find those points in those data. Whereas generative AI, what it's doing is it's not even really, I think saying it's like looking in those databases is not quite right.
Correct.
The way that these text models are trained is you don't even differentiate between where, you might have three different sites. It doesn't have any clue with that. All it does is it takes every sentence in isolation, right? It doesn't look at them all together, looks at each sentence in a row. It deletes a word from the sentence and it says, okay, predict me the next word in that sentence. And that's how these language models are trained. You train it on every sentence on the internet in that format. And then you ask it to just keep generating the next word. And that's where this stuff comes from.
The
And
guessing,
yeah,
which is why
really,
we see hallucinations, right? Because it
right.
ultimately is guessing on chains of, we're talking about
Yeah.
text now. It's different with images
Yeah.
and stuff.
It's different images, similar, but yeah, a little bit different. Yeah, text I think is somewhat easier to understand, but it's also, I think, more mind-boggling in some ways, is because it really is just saying, okay, what is the most likely next word given the set of words that I have seen? Right. So when you start typing an email, it's like, okay, what do we think the next word is going to be? And so all these models are doing, all ChatGPT and some of these generative AI layer models are doing is doing that, but predicting, 500 words for your article, 1,000 words for your report. And that's where these things are working. They're not pulling in the Google sense where they know where those words are coming from. They know those original sources are still structured and located in certain places. They've been sort of absorbed, in this probabilistic model of what is the next word. And I think that's a big part where folks kind of missed the difference between these generative AI products and sort of more traditional, what we sometimes call good old fashioned AI, where you like are integrating data across places and you know where things are and you have knowledge, you have explicit representations, and stuff like that. And so I think having this distinction, like you said, Mitch, is really good. And sometimes I struggle to try to explain the different, to make sure that people realize that there is a really
There
fundamental
is, yeah.
distinction between these two things.
And then when I blow it out and think with my science fiction brain and what could be, and I think it is what Kevin Kelly would call an inevitable, because we programmed it, at least initially, to think in that predictive ways the brain might. I'm curious what happens when we take that idea of AI, that it is able to reason on its own and then explain how it's doing it, and then couple it into the generative tools, because I believe ultimately there might be a better way that humans in our simplistic brain probably can't think about structuring content. And that's where I'm concerned, but I'm really curious about what happens when it's not the brain and the physicality of how we type keys. So one of the things I joke about at the end of my keynote about AI is, how would you fix code that was created by something that doesn't think like you and doesn't type? It manifests it because it's not type. AI is not typing. So these are the interesting things that always, I believe, becomes super fascinating. If we want to roll out what the next many years, we might realize that actually our writing is just as simple as hieroglyphics. And that's not the way we should be thinking. And that AI could maybe show us a different, a more 360 or three-dimensional way to think about how we create things. And that's why I think it could ultimately be super more creative than human.
So I would almost go the other way with it. So
Okay.
one of the arguments that I've been making for quite some time is that the success, I think, of a lot of the text-based generative AI is because we as humans understand, we imbue language with so much more meaning than just the words on the page, right?
Right.
Like words to you and I mean a lot more. We can interpret them, and we do things like theory of mind, right? We start to say, okay, well, what is this thing that's writing this text thinking, right? Like what is
Shakespeare.
the
Yeah.
intent? Yeah. You
Shakespeare.
know, we're able to think about what the other person is thinking and sort of understand that, right? Like words are just this medium of exchange. And I think that if we were to communicate somehow with these machines more directly, I think we're on our own brains are doing a lot of unconscious work when we see the text that comes out of these things, right? We're ascribing intent to them. We're ascribing um, these human-like qualities that are just not there, because at the end of the day, it's just the probability of the next word given the previous word.
Yeah.
And so we're imbuing a lot of that intent there. I think in a way that is really helps them be more magical in some ways. And so I would almost go the other way with your question about creativity, in that, it might show us some linkages, but I think in terms of really getting at the nuance and the ways that words make people feel, and the connection, I think a lot of places where like the creativity really comes from, I think they're always going to really struggle with that, because it's not writing, right? Because it's not experiencing in the same way that we are. And I think that's our key advantage.
What a mess it would make of the Bible, Nick.
Oh no.
Can you imagine just thinking about how we think and interpret culturally
Yeah.
the words, the stories? You
Yeah.
watch these pastors turn one line into this whole story of meaning behind it and parsing words and rabbinical studies and debates about this. I'd love to see a real large language model get involved in that debate. It'd be fun.
It would be interesting, right? It's what those connections are. And I think that's part of the thing here, right? Is that
Yeah.
I think we are doing a lot of that work. I think we are unconsciously doing a lot of that work for them, and that shows us, I think, what we're good at as human in ways that are not, computing, that are not generative AI, that are not just these, that it's good at these literal finding these patterns, right, and exploding these patterns into worlds and rearranging them in completely new ways, right? I think that's what, hopefully, we're better at. Or maybe I'm just saying all this to make myself feel better.
Well, look, we all have to validate our reason for waking up in the morning, right? And making sure
This is
that
true.
what we do has meaning and matter and goes beyond just the tombstone, as it were. You mentioned the transformer document. It's something I know a little about. When I think of the transformer document, which I want you to explain so people really understand that, because to me, that was one of the paradigm shifts that pushed AI to the commercial place we're seeing it today. I love this conversation that happened, especially when ChatGPT really started to rise. This, wow, like Google is really, the IBM, like what Microsoft, everyone's kind of surprised at all these companies. Transformer, this idea came from Google. It was a Google
Yep.
Lab thing, right? So
Yep.
talk a little bit about what this is. And if you can, feel free to deconstruct what is a media narrative that isn't true. When I would speak to my peers and friends, I'd say, I don't think like, you forgot about DeepMind. You forgot about like people just forget about it because they see ChatGPT and they think, oh, OpenAI is like the new Google.
This is good. You're putting me on the spot here. I'll see if I can not mess this up. It's a technical
We
paper.
got right, but
But at
we can
Yeah,
simplify it. I know you can.
at a high level, sort of what happens in all of these. So all of these kind of neural net based systems are using these things called perceptrons, which are just basically like they're like fake little neurons, right? They're coming from the 1960s. And the idea of having one is from the 1960s. Now, when they talk about how many parameters these models have, right, when they're up in the trillions, that's how many neurons they have now, right? That's what they're referring to when they say that word parameter. And so the way that we train these models, the way that we are able to do that, they uses this algorithm called backpropagation. It's just the way that you update because remember, you have these 1.5 trillion parameters or whatever. The way that you update them, the way that you revise those points in your slope of a line is through this thing called backprop. And you have to kind of, at the end of the day, probably vastly oversimplify all of it, it's a lot of linear algebra that we do on GPUs. And one of the ways that you are able to do this much faster to simplify some of the computations is through this idea of what's called a transformer, right? Is you're basically summarizing a lot of computations with slightly fewer computations. And the transformer architecture paper, which again came out of Google when I was still at IBM, it was in like 2016 or so, 2015 or 16. Um, you know, at first I was like, oh, this is just it's a linear programming trick. And we're using it because we've decided that we're training all of these neural nets on these GPUs and we're going to do this. We have to do this with linear algebra. And so this is a way to do the linear algebra more efficient. That's what transformer architectures are. And so at the end of the day, it's a way to speed up that training. And so when we talk about training on a text database that is like the internet, not like just Wikipedia, but like all of the internet, you're able to do that because of some of these speed ups that you get due to transformers. What OpenAI did was, I think they were really focused on ChatGPT as a product and really focused on which one is there? I always get confused. Is it Dolly? Whatever their image one is.
Dolly, yeah.
Yeah, Dolly. Sorry, I get confused from the different Midjourney in them. So that those as a product, as an interface to a product, right? And I think if you look at the architecture of ChatGPT, everything about it is there to try to trick you into thinking it's a person, right? The fact that it kind of types, as opposed to Bard, which just pops up all the text at one time, thing is not typing; it just generates all the.
Yeah. Yuval Noah Harari said that we're moving from the attention economy to the intimacy economy. And this is the ultimate tool in simulating intimacy. You're so right that you type something and you watch it and you think, oh, it's writing to me. It's just me.
It's got little
original.
Bubbles. Got little bubbles like your chat program does, all this stuff. By the way, this all happened in the 70s, I think, with this program called Eliza that was doing this like Freudian psychology thing that would just talk back to you and like people would get really addicted to it.
Right. Or wait a certain amount of time. It could answer it immediately, but it gives you that pause to think that it's thinking, right?
Yeah.
Fakes intimacy.
And getting back to the transformers, like I've been working in the space. I'd never quite bought that it was going to be this impressive. And I think what OpenAI did was they spent a lot of time and effort into productizing that idea of let's take this stuff and let's turn this into a chatbot that's able to have these natural language conversations. We don't care about being focused on a particular product. I don't work at IBM anymore, but like we were really focused on chatbots for when you go to a website, like how do you give certain answers? How do you diagnose certain problems, which is a much fundamentally different problem than how do you just have a conversation with someone? And that's where OpenAI really started and really applied a lot of these ideas that were in the literature, right? That folks were working on. They're very cutting edge, and applied them at a scale and with a product intention. I think that was much different than what folks were going to do. And I think that the interesting stuff, at least to me, is the place that I use. I mean, I write a lot of code and I write a lot of papers, but like I think the Copilot type stuff now it's going to be integrated into Office. But the Copilot for code, that's one of those places where this stuff is amazing. And that's one of those key product areas. And I think that that's where you're going to see a lot of competition, because there's not a lot of secret sauce to these models currently. There's a bit, but what the secret sauce is, to be perfectly honest, and I just got with a big AI conference was here in New Orleans about a month ago. The secret sauce is who has the most data and who has the most computing power.
Right. Hygienic data. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole,
that's a whole other mess.
If you want to go down this data wormhole, I'll go there. This is a big concern for me personally.
For sure. I mean, that's the thing. So this leads me into, and again, thanks for that clarity, because again, I think it sets the table that these big tech companies weren't on their heels, that they've been using and playing in this technology for longer than even OpenAI existed. I think OpenAI dug deep on the transformer tech and productized in a very different way.
Yeah.
And I think they did it in a way that perhaps the others weren't thinking about because of the fact that they are based on the attention economy and may not have seen this ability to create that intimacy. I think you're right that ultimately, if I were on the business development team at OpenAI. I'm guessing they were trying to do what you were doing at IBM and optimize on chatbots, and then realized what the net was going to be. That it was
Yeah.
actually more of a Grammarly than a chatbot.
And I think that because they were smaller, they were able to kind of productize it that chatbot way that was not tied to, say, a particular client. If you're thinking about Amazon, like even with their data services division, they're still very much tied to client, and they're not, really thinking like, hey, like let's just build a chatbot because it's fun, right? Which is at the end of the day how the ChatGPT OpenAI product started, and then it got a lot crazier. But like, I mean, I think that's why we have startup cultures and we have big businesses, right? And so it's not that at least the technical prowess to do these things. It is very difficult, but it's not outside. It's not like outside the realm of what Google or IBM or any of these companies could muster. But I think OpenAI saw, like you saying, like saw a place for this that nobody else really saw. And honestly, I wouldn't have picked it out. Like, yeah, let's build a giant chat. Thousands of engineers.
You mentioned coding in generative AI, which leads me to thinking from Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote Sapiens and Homo Deus, and is quite the thinker in this space, whether he's an AI developer, I think is secondary to his ability to understand work and people and how they operate. When I think about what he says a lot, there are some really interesting thoughts that can be, when I use the word interesting, it could be terrifying, I guess, too. One is when we think about people and how they're compensated for their work, it would typically look very simplistically like you studied something very advanced in college or an advanced degree that very few people could do. You then optimize on that skill and get to a point of either middle or upper management or leadership where you just have a lot of data from your experiences that allows you to deploy against a very high and difficult to get degree. But that ultimately in your day-to-day work, like coding, you're often doing a lot of repetitive tasks. And unfortunately, this is the type of stuff that AI loves to eat first. Really repetitive tasks, as complicated as they are. And that to really think about yourself as a leader or a future employee, you have to think about how you start diminishing those repetitive tasks that AI can easily take and what more value can you add. So that's one simplistic thought that I think is really quite interesting, because when you look at most executives, I guess their day is quite repetitive, that it doesn't really require all that. So there's something there. But the other thing he talked about, which I think is more profound, is if you look at Germany pre-Holocaust World War II, Germany was facing 25%-ish unemployment, and that is the petri dish for extremism. And his concern isn't whether or not we'll make it through this. I am an optimist and believe that we'll make it through this, be better because of these tools. And I don't think they're going to destroy us or currently destroying us, as some people do think. There's many really intelligent AI people who think we're already there. But his concern is that middle point, that if we get to a point where this technology is able to do this with code and able to do this with writing and the more creative tasks that are repetitive, that if we fall into a place because of where the world's at already politically, that's the really scary part. That these bots, these AI generative tools don't have rights. They are not beholden to the rules that we have, whether it's copyright based or language based or hate speech based or beyond. And that could have a massive decaying of democracy. And that's more his concern versus others who think, well, the bots will just take over the world, decide it's too hot here and shut everything down and kill us all. Can you talk just a little bit about this point that we're at and how you think about it in terms of, I could see it that way, because I think you're exactly right. We used to have junior copywriters, and my argument is that ChatGPT currently, with very little prompt, is not only better than those junior copywriters, but I can speak to it much more directly in a way that wouldn't get me in trouble with HR. I hate this, give me 10 more, and it's done. No, as I wasn't treated well, and we could interface with it in a different way. Maybe I'll say please in my prompt, maybe I won't, I don't know. But can you talk, like, these are a lot of concepts, but I'm trying to glue together what could be a very dangerous time as these tools are just great and doing what they do.
Yeah. And by the way, I always thank my Google Assistant just in case they do rise up and take us.
Right. You're kind to it, right? I too bow down to my AI god. Yeah.
but no, I think I think Harari's onto something here. And even, personally, my first internship in college was, working for NASA, converting Fortran code to Java. And that job is now completely done by Copilot and ChatGPT, right?
Right.
There's not an entry-level job that really exists in the way that it did before. And I think you're right, that it's a lot of these models and a lot of this AI is getting really good at these low-level tasks. But I would also argue that this isn't new. This is a lot of the hollowing out of manufacturing in the US. We had machines that were very good at repetitive tasks. And this is sort of what, at the end of the day, what making the machine kind of act smarter is all about. Like, what you're going to just keep seeing is that it's going to get better and better at these tasks that have high value, that we spend a lot of time on, that we spend a lot of effort on, we spend a lot of money on, but that, like, we can actually accomplish with just a little bit more, technology. And I don't know what the answer is, right? Because I think we've been seeing this slow erosion of these types of things for a really long time, and that's what a lot of the stuff that we talk about in our book about technology and AI. You look at farming, you look at ditch digging, you look at manufacturing, you look at early computation. I alluded to it earlier. We used to have rooms and rooms of people with college degrees that would do nothing but take logarithms, and that's how we got to the moon. And we don't employ those people anymore, right? They do something else now. We had typists. We used to have typist banks.
Just
we
watch
don't have them
Hidden
anymore.
Figures.
This is a great piece.
Great
of this,
example
right?
of that. What they were calling computers, like people were the computer.
We forget that wasn't that long ago.
No.
It was 1960s.
Last week, yeah.
So, and I think you see this over and over and over, right? You see this erosion of these hard tasks with these machines, and we've seen this for 150 years, right? All of the Industrial Revolution, and now it's we're at the next phase of this. But I think you're totally right in that there is I don't know how hippie you want to get on this podcast, but one of the things that we need to do is support training, and that's one of the reasons why I love doing education. Support training, support people to become skilled in these tools, to be able to use them, to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that are created by these tools. Again, I'm pretty much a tech optimist on a lot of fronts, and I think that there's going to be more opportunity created than there's going to be sort of established jobs taken away. At least I hope. And that as long as we are committed to sharing in that, and to bringing people along as that technology progresses, I think we can be okay. But we've got to have that commitment. And again, like you've alluded to, politically, culturally, economically, sometimes we can lose that commitment. But at the end of the day, like these tools are creating much more value, right, than they're destroying. And again, something like farming, I think, is one of the key ones. It used to be that 50% of this country was involved in agriculture. Now, like 2% is. And you know what the difference is? We produce many multiples more food than we used to. And so there's clearly a lot of value.
I do just wonder, though, if that transposes to the creative class or the knowledge class, because that,
I don't know,
I feel is more concerning.
Do you think that I think this is where this fight is happening right now with the writer strike and the actor strike and things like that, is like, how much do we need to protect that, right? And I think art and creative classes always struggled to reclaim their fair share.
But the knowledge class never faced this. That's the different one. That's the big
one. That's where it gets a little scary, right? And so
think about consulting, banking, financing, legal systems. I mean, this isn't one of those things.
The legal, I think, is going to be crazy with this, right?
Crazy. Insurance. You can really rabbit hole on it. We talked about the idea of deploying responsibly. Here we sit, it's 2024. We've seen a lot of rhetoric around what OpenAI did. We saw the leader, Sam Altman, get removed, get reinstated. There was some conspiracy-ish type stories around what happened as to why this would have happened. What did he uncover or was ready to unleash that others didn't maybe want? Hold me back. I'm going to do something crazy. I love that that's like my favorite, like, boxing metaphor for life is like, don't let me at him. I'm going to destroy him if you let. But can you talk a little bit about, like, truly, because of where you sit and the work you've done with both IBM, NASA, school, corporations, thinking about this, would you make the assertion that we've been deploying this responsibly? Are we doing this terribly wrong? Is this a house on fire that we're trying to contain? How do you see it? Because if we haven't been deploying it responsibly, there are no indications from what I've seen, and that includes some of the testimony we've seen at the government levels, that we're going to get this right at all.
It's a big concern, and I think it's a big concern for me. But a lot of the tech stuff is still kind of this move fast and break things sort of mentality, right? Like I think one of the most irresponsible things, and this we wrote a piece on this for MIT Sloan a couple months ago, is that when they were training these models, there was no respect for copyright. There was no respect for whether or not some of the stuff they were scraping from the web they should be allowed to do. They were just doing it, right? And I think that that's kind of this hacker mentality. That's okay. I mean, I kind of somewhat condone it in an academic space because you're just trying to see if things would work. But I thought that part was real, and I still think that part is. And this, you see this with the New York Times lawsuit, the sort of Silverman lawsuit
With OpenAI, yeah.
with OpenAI.
Can I make an argument, though? I'd be curious to see how you react to it. I'm a creative person. And I believe in copyrights. I was in the music business, the media business. But I'm reading a lot of things, and I'm taking in a lot of authors. It could be you. It could be a Seth Godin and a Handley. I'm taking in all of these things, and then I'm creating, I'm using air quotes here, an output based off of my thinking, where I may or may not even source it, because I may not even know this has come out of 15 different arguments, something I saw on a podcast, something I saw a speaker do, and I'm creating my own thinking, that there is no original thinking, that everything is an iteration of something. And I don't know if this argument holds weight, and it feels like it does, and no one's pointing it out, that I don't know if it was trained on these to steal that information so much as it was to create the inspiration for what the output is, if you know what I mean. That's a really hard thing. So when you think about the music business, the Marvin Gaye's family, it would be great. What's going, like what's sampling, what's fair use, what's this, and then if you zoom out and know anything about music, you'd go, it's ultimately 7 chords, and there's only so many iterations and feels, and we're now going to go back and say, look, who inspired you? We're going to keep track of everything you ever listened to and make sure that everybody is properly compensated for how they inspired this output. I don't know if there's a correlation there, but it feels almost like there is. Now, granted, they should have gotten permission to access the database. I think that is the number one problem. Yeah. But beyond that, on the output side, I go like, I don't know. Like if I have a subscription to New York Times, a subscription to Wikipedia or whatever, I'm going to be creating things based off of how I'm influenced.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit different though, in that you're creating. By the way, I have my guitar sitting here in the background.
Okay, but my bass isn't here, but we can jam later. Yeah.
We'll do it later. Yeah. It's a good point, right? There's at least a basic level where it's like, well, they maybe should have like bought a copy of the book at least once so that they could be inspired by it. But then it's another thing that they're turning around and they're selling, again, if you're buying into this argument, they're selling creativity. They're selling creativity on demand. So do they need to pay a license every time that they infer from that? And again, you're in the music business, right? Like typically a musician is paid, they're paid per stream, they're paid per performance. Every time they sort of issue that creativity, they're compensated for that. And every time ChatGPT issues a creativity that is based on someone, ChatGPT is compensated for that.
But they're not compensated when the next guitar player starts writing music because they love them.
Yeah, and that's true.
Like it's again, to steal a line from that exact world, it's a blurred line.
It's very good. It's again, it touches on, the way technology has changed things, right? Like the fact that they're able to integrate all this and then offer creativity as a service is very different model than what we used to have. We used to have creativity as a service used to be called like, your teacher, your mentor, or someone that you could then, someone who's seen a lot more than you. And so it's capturing and distributing, and all of these models, they've been changing since the internet's been a thing, right? And so it's very interesting times. And I think that that's a conversation that wasn't going to happen until something like OpenAI, like ChatGPT happened, because it's like, oh, look at what's happening. And now we have to have this conversation of how do we want to regulate this? There's always a gap, between technology and regulation.
I mean, I'd argue that is a conversation that's been happening for 2 decades and hasn't been resolved. If you look at publishing rights are fundamentally driven by geography and language, which is ridiculous in a globally connected world. And that's also where I'm coming from. If you couldn't resolve that and realize my Netflix, because I live in Canada, is not your Netflix, is because of how they did these deals, that's really absurd in a VPN connected world. And that's why I get somewhat scared and less optimistic, because if they can't even solve for that, I have little hope that they'll solve for a result of works from different pieces. That's my bigger threat here.
No, and I agree with you. I think it's a really challenging environment, and I think that nobody knows how this is going to sort out. That's why, was it Microsoft or OpenAI came out and said that they're going to they took out an insurance policy to basically indemnify people in the future. It's because everyone's a little confused. This is the part about being an adult that no one told me when I was a kid. Like, everybody's just confused, and we're all just kind of trying to do our best.
Nobody knows what they're doing, and we're all guessing. Yeah, exactly. Oh, I thought we don't do that. Yeah,
that's it too. But I think this is that's what we're kind of living through, right? It's fundamental, like you said, it's a fundamentally, I think, disruptive technology. It changes the way that creativity is productized. It changes the way that we do work. It can change the ways that lots and lots and lots of people do work. And how do we compensate the people that went into creating that? And all kinds of things. And you've seen stuff like this before. One of the ones that I love bringing up is Waze, which is now part of Google Maps. It used to be that people could annotate the maps, and in Israel, people spent a lot of time annotating these maps, and they tried to sue Google for a share of the profits or sue Waze for a share of the profits when they sold, but got told no, even though they spent a lot of time on that. So the way that we compensate people for their labor, not to get, again, too into the economist books.
Yeah, we're heading into gig economy.
Yeah, we don't want to go there, but like
creator content, yeah.
Right. It's a tough space. And I think it's one that technology is constantly changing. And I think AI, like you pointed out, I think AI is really going to have a big effect on as we go forward. And I don't think anybody knows the answer of how it's going to shake out.
What's your timeline? Because I have a couple more things I'd like to cover if you have time. If not, I can wrap it up. But just a couple more.
I got a 10 that I'm supposed to be at, but I probably got about 5 more minutes if you want to do that.
So let me do one and I'll see where we go. We have another term we haven't talked about, AGI, this moment in time where this tech is, I would say that AGI is when the tech is equal to, can truly fool us, or smarter than what we are. This seems to be a major concern. There was calls for us to pause development of AI over the past little while. There is a lot of divisiveness around real technologists about how far we should go. I even remember Sam Altman in an interview with Lex Friedman, Lex asking him if GPT had reached AI either in this version or a version that they already have. And I believe Sam's response was, "What do you think?" or "I don't know," which was like a pretty scary thing to hear from the person who's doing this. Sam Altman has said that we could hit an extinction level crisis if we don't think about this. And again, that's the hold me back, I'm doing crazy things here. But AGI is a real term, artificial general intelligence. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what that looks like. Some people say we're decades away. Some people say we're already there. We don't realize it. And these are not, again, they're not armchair quarterbacks like me. These are smart people.
Yeah. I got to be honest. I've never, as an AI guy, as a large-term AI guy, I've never been a big believer in the AGI thing. I think that it's a really kind of fun animating concept. It's like why we build the things we build. But I don't know if it's a goal. I don't really think it's a goal in and of itself. But like two, I think you see a lot of the power. The power has been in things that are really good at very small tasks and then linking them together, right? And that's, I think, very different than I think a lot of people talk about AGI, which is this general intelligence that can do everything, that can integrate all of this stuff. I think the places where AI has made its most impact is on a lot of these narrow tasks, but then doing those at scale, which is a very different type of problem than having a general purpose intelligence. And I don't think we're gonna. I mean, maybe one day in the very far future we get somewhere where the AGI works. But I think if the AGI is a thing, but I think that we're almost, humans are like we really want to see other intelligent things. Like when my cat does something even quasi smart, I was like, oh, this is so smart, you know?
Yeah, it's
we like program, you know, to look for this. And I've just never been a big sort of AGI guy, a big neurointelligence guy. Like, let's do these tasks, let's do them well, and then let's have lots of tools to do tasks well. And you compose those in very smart ways, and then you get these very amazing results. And I'm not a big X risk AGI guy. I do a lot of work in it, which is kind of funny, but I don't think the risk is that the technology is going to destroy us, right? I think the risks are much more Prozac in a way, like that, like what you said. It's how do we compensate people so we continue to have data sources to build things? How do we, make sure that we are not routing all this traffic to these neighborhoods? How do we, it's the ways that we deploy these tools, I think, that have real impacts now, that are significant, and especially when you look at things like loans, things like housing, things like recidivism, things like criminal policing, and things like that. Like, I think there's a lot of impacts from these technologies, using these predictive technologies, using these generative technologies in these domains that are having real impacts now that I think are much more significant than worrying about whether or not, the Terminator is going to show up in 1,000 years. And I don't know, I have a hard time.
So let's rope it back with another term, which is alignment. Alignment is a word we use because I don't think we want to use the word control, especially because it might be relevant to something that can think independently. And we have a huge issue with saying, how do we control the AI? So we talk about alignment, its ability to work with us, what some people would call, I think you've called it too, this ethically bounded artificial intelligence. How crazy of a thought is that? I mean, you look at the world and think we're not even aligned on what lines there are in the map, or if the world's flat or not, and pizza gates and on and on. But like, beyond conspiracy theories, do you believe that alignment is a critical part of it? And is it even, like, I feel like it's an impossibility to make it aligned with human values, because then we're asking a coder to define human values.
Right. So this is the part. So I am a big alignment guy. So I just went to the alignment workshop. I think this.
I love it.
But I'll use alignment slightly differently, right? And I think that one of the things, the way that I sort of talk about alignment, and a lot of my work on like the ethically bounded AI, and a lot of this work is it's about, when we make decisions, we consider a lot of constraints that we don't articulate well, really. It's like, oh, well, I want to, you're picking a restaurant. There's always like somebody says something and you're like, oh, wait, but there's this reason that I don't want to do, right? There are these things in my head that I did not say, or they're implicit, that I really didn't want you to do, right? And so when I think about alignment research, and when I think about some of this, the bounding research that we do, especially the decision-making tasks, it's about, how do I make sure that the human is in control of what's being generated, or what's being decided, or what's being predicted? How do I try to infer constraints from maybe previous decisions, maybe data about them? And then how do I use that to bound the space of decisions? It could be the space of words, it could be the space of routes, it could be the space of whatever. How do I bound that output space of the AI to stay within what that person wants? Now, there's a bigger question, which is what that person wants reasonable? Which is a much more society-based question, which I don't
and
really
is it fair and equitable to another group?
Right. And that's a whole conversation in of itself. And again, that's more where I work on the community engaged side. It's like, I think the answer to that is really going and talking to the people that these decisions are affecting. How are these tools being deployed either against these people or with and make it the conversation more like, how do these tools help these communities? And I think that's why you've got to have, you've got to go work with the people that are going to be affected by the outputs of these AI. And I think a lot of times there's a big remove from OpenAI over in California or whatever. And, we're working with criminal justice organizations in New Orleans and trying to understand how these tools are being deployed and what the impacts are. And then how do we back out those impacts into the tools so that they try to not do those. But that involves going and working with the community. And I think that's where I think a lot of the alignment work needs to be more focused, is what is the impact on the people on the ground of these tools? Sorry, I believe very strongly in this part of it. So,
well, what I want to do is invite you to come back so that we can dig a little bit deeper into some of the bigger topics and see how they evolve, because I think that would be great. With that, tell me the one thing that made you think differently.
Oh man, there's been so many in my life. One that I wanted to pick on, because we've kind of talked about it a lot, and I'm going to tie this into our whole conversation. So there's kind of this division. Again, you made the distinction between generative AI and sort of other AI. there's kind of this division within AI research around sort of what we call model-free or statistical AI, which is very machine learning, versus model-based AI, which is like where you have all the rules and you know exactly what things are. And when I was in school, when I was learning all this stuff, I was a very model-based person because I was like, there is no way that these statistical, just looking at the next word thing, they're ever going to do anything smart. There's no way that's going to work, whatever. And I will tell you, I mean, honestly, even me, the first time I sat down and played with ChatGPT, it changed my mind. I was like, this thing can kind of I don't want to use the word understanding, but it's able to generate language in a way that was wildly surprising to me. And honestly, even when I was starting to work, I've become much more of a data and model free type person. And it's just really changed the way that I went to school, the way that I learned about how to do AI and all the work that I'd sort of done before. It's really become more, this model free statistical AI has become more a part of my work. I think, the power of it changed my mind. As someone who's in it and who's seen it, it really did change the way I think about some of the stuff with the way that I do research. So
I love that. That's great, Nick. Let people know where they can find out more about you. You've done a ton of writing on this topic and your thinking. Where are you active? What are you doing? Let people know.
yeah, so we do. I got a website which is mostly updated. It's nickmattei.net. We also have a web presence at the Tulane Community Center for Community Engaged AI. If you just search for that, I think we have a long, sub thing. We also have a big presence at ai.tulane.edu, which ports to a lot of the things that we're doing there. And then we have a book that came out that was with MIT Press that came out in February. And it's Computing and Technology Ethics, Engaging Through Science Fiction, which is really designed to be a high school or college textbook to get students to think about the impacts of technology, specifically sort of computing and AI. And we got a lot of great, awesome sci-fi stories that we use as case studies, which is a lot of fun. And so that's out from MIT Press right now and available on Amazon and everywhere else where they're sold.
So, Nick, I hope you'll come back so we can dig deeper. There's a lot of areas in this crazy world of artificial intelligence. And just thanks so much for your time. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, no, it was great to be here. Thanks a lot. I'm glad we got this worked out. It was a lot of fun to dive in all these different directions.